Hi, I'm Professor Green, and today we'll be doing the final chapter, Chapter 11. This is Section 1. I'm here in my office here at LMU, and so you can see, not very exciting. I don't have much up on the walls, but here we go. So there we go. I officially do have an office here at LMU, although I record a lot of these videos from home. Let me go ahead and share my screen. So we have this final chapter, which is exciting, conflict negotiation and decision making. And initially, right, we might say, oh gosh, what a somewhat boring topic. But actually, it happens more in the workplace than you think it might. Um, that the learning objectives for this chapter are list ways to manage conflict more effectively because it will show up. Maybe if you think about your family situation, right? Even the family members that you get along with so well also will have conflicts at times. We're going to describe methods of negotiating in ways that generate better outcomes. And we're going to explain how you can make more powerful, more impactful, and less biased decisions as well. Because sometimes when we go into a conflict, right, our emotions get in the way and we're under stress and we can have some biases. So let's go ahead and talk about the first section of Chapter 11. We're going to list ways to manage conflict more effectively. And again, as I read this chapter, yes, I was thinking of things in the workplace, but I was actually thinking about things from home even more. So first, we're going to identify types of conflict and why they occur. And we're going to describe different conflict management strategies. And lastly, we're going to avoid conflict management pitfalls. So what are the types of conflict? Let me just make sure I didn't forget any notes. Yeah, the types of conflicts when people disagree, right, over issues of either substance or personality, right? And substance, there's value in resolving conflict, but when we have issues over personality, that's something that falls more into the dysfunctional area, which we'll talk about. So, conflict can be upsetting. I see my son sometimes when my husband and I start to go into very functional conflict. My son sometimes runs away because at 5, he doesn't really understand that conflicts can sometimes be healthy. It's not always bad. And sometimes it's needed, and we should even promote it, right, in the form of voice or speaking up when we disagree or hold a different view or perspective. And so after that happens and I can see my son running away, I always make an effort to talk to him about it and say, yeah, I know you saw, mommy and daddy, we never yell, but, we were talking a little bit more assertively to each other. I say, and that's usually not how I talk to you or, how I talk to grandpa. But it's okay sometimes. I tell him that sometimes it's good to talk about things. And obviously he knows that, sometimes he has a disagreement with us. But I think he just doesn't see it in the same light. So conflict can be sorted into 2 basic categories, functional and dysfunctional, as I briefly alluded to. So functional, known as task conflict, is healthy, constructive, about ideas and solutions regarding a task being performed. But dysfunctional are disagreements that lead to disadvantages or harmful to the individual or the team. And so this chart here, 11.1, says, there's functional conflict in here. But if we have too much conflict, that's bad for performance. And, my parents are divorced. And yes, when I was 5, they divorced when I was 6. I could see that, even though I was young, it was heading in this direction. But I feel like my marriage hopefully is still in this area. And then, if there's too little conflict, that's also bad for performance because people are afraid then to say something and to voice their concerns. Teaching at Pepperdine, I have to say I felt that very often teaching in the School of Communications, ironically, that, we didn't want to say anything bad. Everything was good on the bluff in Malibu. And it was really hard to, bring up conflict. I felt as a grad student, it was kind of brushed underneath the rug, or when I worked there, as people just didn't want to talk about these things. So Right. And as I said, substantive conflict is matters of substance rather than personality. So, yeah, we want to be able to work through, hopefully, matters of substance, because then you can create a stronger relationship in the end. So there are other types of conflict, relational conflict, emotional conflict resulting from interpersonal incompatibility. So that's why I think it's so important to be self-aware. That's why we do the Myers-Briggs in class, to understand, more about yourself, and then also to understand where other people are coming from. As I said, my husband is a strong planner and I'm more spontaneous. And so I could see us getting into conflict when I changed the plans last minute. And he too has, negotiated with me. I can see I changed the plans on him last minute this morning because I didn't realize that my mom was coming in early from the Czech Republic, and he now has been able to be a little more flexible with me. And I also try and not do that whenever I can. So dysfunctional conflict can also involve destructive, substantive conflict, conflict that occurs when members of a work unit fail to act because they can't agree on task goals. And for better or worse, this does happen. People just refuse to do the work. They don't want to get involved. And then there's more turnover and absenteeism. And yeah, so we just really want to make sure that we kind of stay away from this destructive piece. Status conflicts are attempts to defend or elevate one's own status relative to another. Again, this is a zero-sum game, right? If we start to make ourselves, bigger than the other person, if you're self-aware, you'll see that, right? That never helps anybody. Even if you are more senior or have more work experience, we don't try and pull rank. And then process conflict is disagreement in how roles and responsibilities should be assigned. And, this happens all the time. It's just kind of natural in some ways, right? The marketing team has their priorities, the finance team has their priorities. And so, right, as a project manager, I was consistently kind of trying to remind them of the goals of the project overall, and negotiating here, negotiating there a little bit. Right, different teams and work units pursue different goals with different time horizons, right? The client always wants it ASAP. Engineering has other priorities that they want to work on their projects or other projects, most exciting projects. And right, marketing, they want it, out as well as soon as possible, usually, so they can start selling it. And the problem is we have limited resources, right? Time, money, and budget to perform the tasks. And so here are some, as I just mentioned, research and development teams, and they want product quality, long time horizon, as much time as possible to do the work. As students, you always want more time. Manufacturing team, they want cost efficiencies. They have a short time horizon usually. And marketing teams, they want the customer needs, and again, a short time horizon. So if you're ever in a project management role, you're consistently juggling these different needs. So what are some conflict management strategies? We focus on conflict resolution to eliminate the underlying reasons for conflict. But sometimes if the conflict is functional, we don't want to get rid of it right away, because this can stimulate some positive outcomes, some new ideas. And so we want to choose between two different strategies: tolerating the differences or reducing the differences. I have a good friend, he works in Latin America, and I feel like he's really good at tolerating differences. He just thrives on it. I think he should have gone to law school instead of business school, because he just loves engaging in conversation about differences, about anything, culture, teams, everything and anything. And he just feels like this is the best way to get new ideas. He's a marketing pro, and he just thinks that, the best, tools to get new ideas about product is through conflict. And I have to agree with him sometimes. So, we want to push members to appreciate their differences. And, it's definitely appropriate for functional conflict. But for dysfunctional conflict can also work, but it has to be implemented by a skilled facilitator, someone who does this, maybe as their full-time job. There are facilitators who help teams go through conflict. And then we can also, reduce differences. So this kind of, gets everyone involved to adopt new attitudes, behaviors, approaches towards one another, higher resolution, higher values, and getting rid of our own identities and coming together with a goal, a common goal. And right, I'm not going to lie to you, this is really what happens more times than not. But sometimes, we do want to foster that difference. So how can we handle functional conflict? Because I think, without, eliminating the diversities, we can tolerate these differences. And again, I think this is a refreshing way to look at conflict. We cook the conflict is what it says. So increasing and decreasing the tensions. And so it's called creative abrasion. So brainstorming is a common technique, or raising the conflict means tightening deadlines or increasing requirements. Yeah, it's kind of an exciting thing. I kind of like it, but only because if I'm the facilitator, if I'm on one of the two sides, it can be really stressful. And then reducing the heat, then the facilitator provides clarity, illuminating, sharing viewpoints, identifying commonalities. And as a professor, sometimes we do this in the classroom. Sometimes we turn up the heat because we want a heated discussion between students. Sometimes they learn better that way, especially when I teach ethics, right? When, there are two different sides of the story, or many different sides of the story. And the whole idea is about discourse. But, right, eventually we want to lower the heat eventually, right? So that we can walk away with, a feeling that we're on the same page. So yeah, it can also foster collaboration and innovation by decreasing the heat. And so here are some strategies for handling dysfunctional conflict, depending on the type of conflict you have: relationship conflict, status conflict, process conflict. I see process conflict being the most common. So, because I won't go through all of these, but to reduce differences, distribute the responsibilities evenly. Job sharing is such a great one. Rotate duties so people can get different perspectives. Appeal to sportsmanship, team expectations. And if you want to tolerate the differences, then you want to clarify the distinctiveness of each role. This person's in marketing, right? This is what they're going to do. This person's in finance. That's what they're going to do. And reinforce the areas of specialization and coordinate distance contributions. So get them to play together. And, this is, really, as I said, kind of turns up the heat and gets them to maybe brainstorm or think of creative ideas. So, yeah, and key tip is, try not to run to your manager to resolve conflicts if you can. That's kind of an immature way to do things, that the manager doesn't want to be pulled in on a regular basis. And so, right, that just like a parent, doesn't want to be pulled in if siblings have an issue. So avoid climbing the ladder of inference. They say wives are very can be vulnerable to this. So that you have this resentment that builds up. You keep thinking about, oh, what are they going to say next? What are they going to do next? And then all of a sudden you like explode. My husband has said that I've done this a few times. So first you want to reflect on what is leading to your conclusions, right? You're probably jumping to conclusions and you're thinking that what they're going to do next is something, but really they're not going to do that potentially, right? Inquire with others to get more information, be open to alternative perspectives. With my husband, I often do it when I feel like I'm carrying too much of the load of parenting, and he's like off, playing with his friends or going to coffee, things. And then I'm like juggling everything. And so I won't say anything. And then all of a sudden I start like throwing things around the house, the toys cleaning up loudly. And he's like, what's going on? And I said, like, well, I think next week you're going to probably be going with your friends again, aren't you? And I'm going to be left, not having time to go to yoga or do things. And so then he's very good at resolving conflict. So he'll say, okay, let's calm down and let's talk about how I can help you with the load. So how can I guard against some common conflict management pitfalls? I really like this chart, because it really talks about, assertiveness, going from unassertive to assertive, and cooperativeness for these two sides. And, sometimes there's a time and a place where you don't necessarily have to address something. For example, you don't have to be assertive. You can avoid a topic, like when the issue is trivial or just when people need time to calm down. I do this all the time, again, at home, when the issue is trivial. My husband he's a clutter bug. He loves stuff everywhere. Okay. It gets to once, twice a year, I like blow up that, like I say, I live in a postage stamp. We have a 3-bedroom home, and I have like one little small space in our house for my laptop and a little closet for my clothes. He has stuff like everywhere. But in my mind, it's somewhat trivial. They're bigger things. He's a great dad. He's a great husband. He helps to provide for our family. He's sick, right? He has cancer. So in my mind, the clutter can be trivial. So I let it go. I'm not very assertive about this stuff. Accommodation, maybe that's also blends into accommodation, right? But I'm not very assertive. So when the issues are more important to you, or when you want to build credits for later, so right, you might accommodate people. Yeah. So I'd say I'm thinking lots of examples, but I'll skip that one for now. Compromise. This happens, here in the middle when for temporary solutions or when time is tight. In my experience, again, this seems to happen a lot because time is often tight. And so I'll do this a lot. I'll say, okay, let's just come up with a solution for now. And then as we get closer, we can change the solution. Authoritative when time is very tight or when decisions are unpopular. In my experience, at least in this country, this doesn't happen very often, or in many countries that I've worked in. Yeah, it's hardly ever that somebody has to come in and put their foot down, unless you're a parent, right? No sugar after 6 o'clock. It's nighttime, it's bedtime, it's 9 o'clock, etc. But even with that, you try and parenting styles nowadays are less of being authoritative. So hopefully that is helpful to identify, where you need to be assertive and where you need to be maybe more cooperative. We always want to aim obviously for win-win strategies, high cooperativeness and high assertiveness, but it's not always possible. In this situation, parties need to commit and not be in a competitive stance or not act in good faith. They need to focus on something that is recognizing that something is wrong and they're trying together to work on a mutually beneficial solution. So yeah, prioritizing collaborative choices that benefit everybody. And right, we minimize win-lose solutions. This is when somebody comes in and says, I'm going to do it my way. I'm sorry, even in parenting, as I said, we rarely do this, only if the child is like unsafe. Even with that, we try and say like, okay, I'm going to pick you up because I'm going to try and keep everybody safe. If they start like throwing things, etc. Yeah, high assertiveness, low cooperativeness, right? Dictate is the solution, right? We really try and avoid this. Hopefully you won't have this very often. And then also lose-lose strategies. Yeah, when no one acts assertively, everyone pretends that the conflict doesn't exist and hopes it will go away. Happens, unfortunately, more than you think. Accommodation, playing down differences, creating an illusion of peaceful coexistence. Again, at Pepperdine, I felt like this happened a lot. People kind of played down their accommodations and then their differences, and then people would leave or quit or be unhappy in the workplace behind closed doors. And then compromise. Right. When each party shows moderate assertiveness and cooperation is ultimately willing to give up something of value to the other, right? So you have to, this, I think of this all the time in my negotiations class in business school, that often the stakes are so high that everybody wants something valuable to them, and then you're all going to walk away with something that is valuable to you. But hopefully in the real world, this doesn't happen all that often. In my experience, not very often at all. It was just more of my strategy in my negotiations class that we saw that happening. Just to be aware of it, right? You just want to be aware that this can happen. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for the part 1 of chapter 11. I will go ahead and finish this video and see you in part 2 of chapter 11.